All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to our March Speaker Series presentation. We're excited to have two doctoral candidates from the Educational Linguistics program presenting today. And what is exciting about both of their research is that it incorporates teachers' perspectives, which is something that we don't often get in research on language learning and educational linguistics. So we're very excited to have our two presenters today. We're soon-to-be doctors, and we will start with a presentation by Hamzah Kuriri. I don't know how to say your name in Arabic, on request strategies in EFL learners' emails, and that will be followed by a presentation by Naif Masrahi on translanguaging in our teachers' perspectives on translanguaging. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chunchman. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. I'm very thrilled to give you a presentation about my dissertation topic. Hopefully that will be just runs as fast as possible, okay, and as informative as it could be. So my dissertation topic is about request strategies in EFL learners' emails, tertiary level study pragmatics and perception of EFL structures. The overview of the presentation, I'll give you a background of my, some information about me, and then I'll talk about my interest. After that, I'll follow up with that with a statement of problem that I found. What is the significance of the study, research questions, literature of the review, methodology, and then I'll talk briefly about the results and discussion, limitation, other kind of things that I have found in my study. Okay. So, background of the researcher. My name is Hamzah. I'm a postgraduate student in educational linguistics. I have been teaching English for a while back in my home country. I'm still working with the University of Jazan and teaching English for students. I have taught at community college, and I have also taught English language learners. Basically what I have taught, it's basic skills kind of courses, writing, grammar, listening, speaking, and other linguistic courses that is somehow related to my topic. I come here to the United States in order to obtain my PhD, and this is one of the goals that I have done so far. My interest is from teaching English students, come across some obstacles, and this is something that we know whenever you teach students, you always have problems, you always come across some kind of difficulties they may encounter. One of them is that they do not understand pragmatics in the way that it should be, or let's say the way that it should be dealt with other participants. I always attempted to provide solutions to those problems. However, pragmatics became a field of interest because of that. I was addicted to it, and still is, somehow to the point that I cannot take it away from my life anymore. Sometimes when my wife talks to me, I always have this thing, analyzing in my mind, what do you mean by this? Does he really need that? Does he really mean that? Some kind of, those questions always trigger me. So specifically, I was very keen to know about how to implement speech in different conversation, also classes. Sociopragmatics, as we know, it deals with social interpretation, while pragmatic linguistics deals most of the time with the grammar. And those are two branches of pragmatics that is somehow have been proposed by some of the researchers. Statement of the problem, forming requests in emails among EFL students at college level has always been problematic, and that's something that I have witnessed myself. They use harsh language, very directive one, and they expect you to somehow accept it due to some factors that I will talk about it. This problem has been noticed by other authors researchers like Crystal, Barron, Bazin, Bacalocas. All of them argue that both native speaker and non-native speaker have this problem, and that was quite puzzling for me. Native speakers? Really? And then I found yeah, there are some kind of new research, the literature review, we talked about it. Are faced with uncertainties regarding styles and politeness strategies in emails interaction. This causes numerous misconceptions, and that's something that could be noticed when I ever receive an email from one of my students which have this kind of harsh language. I always have this question, doesn't he understand there's social distance, or let's say power differences. I know, I mean, in some cases, yeah, but we will talk about that in a bit if you don't mind. So, the misconceptions and error occur most of the time due to the fact that if all learners do not fully comprehend the socio-cultural aspect of the language, or maybe because they are not fully complying with the pragmatic aspects of the given language. We know that sometimes languages differ from each other. For example, if you are talking about Arabic, since we have some kind of people specialize in it, it's totally different from the English in some ways. And we are not here to talk about those kind of differences, but in a general perspective, they are not quite alike in most of the cases. If a learner is to understand that sending emails to their peers is not similar to sending emails to their professor, and this case should be like the one that we will talk about in my dissertation. If a learner must follow the different levels of power and distance, as I have already discussed a little bit earlier, and we need just to talk about it, and that's what triggered me to do this dissertation. Significance of the study. I aim to obtain the needed knowledge about EFL instructors' perception of the emails and how they see it in a way that is polite, in a politeness manner. And the other thing is how they perceive it as being directed or not directed with a different level. And I'm talking about specific college in Saudi Arabia, to be more precise, where I work. And the second thing, I wanted to fill the gap that found in the literature, because I found many of the articles did not talk about this topic very much, and I was really having some difficulties finding articles or maybe finding some sources that can discuss this matter in a more way. Number three, I wanted also to pave the road for future studies interested in this topic. One of them is just to pave it also to myself, because I'm thinking about doing some kind of studies later on. Of course, I want just to discuss with Dr. Sultan later on, if she is keen to help me with that, and I think she is. Sorry. So I came up with the research questions. I have two research questions. The first one, what is the level of directness of the emails perceived by EFL instructors, how they see it, if it's direct or not direct. I'll talk about the directness level in a bit. The second question, what are the levels, or let's say, what are the EFL instructor perception of the emails and how they find it? Do they find it polite, not polite? Do they perceive it as being suitable, not suitable? And those kind of things that I have discussed. All right, so review of the literature. After reviewing some articles, I came up, or let's say, I categorized the papers that I have investigated into 6 different categories, and that's main topics, so let's say main categories that I have. The first one is cross-cultural speech acts, and we will talk about that. The second one, interlanguage requests and forming. The third one, indirect request forming. The fourth one, request in Arabic varieties, request and gender, and request in emails. Right? So the CCSARP, which is the cross-cultural, it compare and contrast the differences between languages. And if we take English and Arabic, for example, how they are different, how are they similar in the way they form their requests or other kind of speech acts. And we have very famous known people, Plumhelka and Alstein, and we have also You and We. Those are the most kind of familiar articles that I have found, and they were very to the topic or to the main point that I'm doing and what I wanted to investigate. The second one is about interlanguage request forming. When we are saying interlanguage, we are comparing between more than one language. So here we compare and contrast different languages to English, usually in one specific speech act. When we talk about apologizing, invitation, other kind of things. For example, if we make a comparison between English and Arabic, that's interlanguage request forming, or the same. That's what happened. Right? Indirect request forming, intra-language. Here, they aim to study the request in the way that is somehow in a specific language. They are not comparing two different languages. They are only focusing in one language. For example, people here study how English-speaking people use this speech act to form, let's say, for example, research questions, or speech, what kind of request in their questions or otherwise. Just to study its own language feature. Okay? All right. Request in Arabic varieties, I have come across many kind of articles that talks about requests and Arabic varieties. We are talking about Libyan, Sudanese, English, Egyptian, Saudi Arabic, and other kind of varieties, and UAE Arabic varieties. And some of the articles we're talking about, that's what I have found in the literature. Okay? Request and gender. Some of the studies attempted to find if there is any relationship between gender and also how we request or how we form our request. If there is any kind of correlation between them, does it somehow differ in gender? We are talking about binary gender in males and females. Okay. All right. Requests and emails. Although the number of studies that I have found in this one was not as much as expected, but there were few that I have attempted to study and also to add in my study. So this kind of branch studies that explore the forming requests and emails. I would say I have found some of the articles. It talked about, just general speaking, about the forms, the shape, and different aspects, how emails should be like formed, but it didn't just go to the point where pragmatics should be placed within that email. Okay? So, in order to do any research, you have to come up with theoretical framework. In my case, I used Blum and Lichtenstein's in 1984. They talked about this, I would say the theoretical framework, this one, somehow defines the directness level into 3 different ones. We will talk about that in more thorough way. So, the next slide should explain what it means. Blum, and Lichtenstein, they argued that there are 3 different levels in which directness requests can be classified: confusionally direct, confusionally indirect, and non-confusionally indirect. So what is the difference between them? Let's say the confusionally direct, when you come to someone and say, give me this. The conventionally indirect, I'm wondering if it's possible. The non-conventionally indirect, it's the effect that you leave on the recipient and how they feel about it. Sometimes you say, the place is hot. Okay, it's a statement, but I'm not telling you just it's hot, but I'm wondering if it's possible to open the door and easy on or something. So why I use this one? To identify request strategies and the degree of politeness and request of the emails of EFL learners within the determined context, which is Arabic in this study. Okay, so I found the theoretical framework. What comes next? Methodology. So what kind of methodology I use? It's a single case study. Why I use this one? It's the next slide. So I use the single case study because I'm focusing on specific group and a specific place, and I'm trying just to find some information on some answers to the questions that I have. This type of methodology enables the researchers to answer how and why type of questions. It is a design of inquiry found in many fields, especially evaluation, in which the researcher develops in-depth analysis of a case, often a program, event, activity, process, or more, one or more individuals. And that's by Kurzweil. So, I have the methodology, I have the theoretical framework. What comes next? Of course, the participants. For the data collection process, I have recruited 10 different participants. So I've done 10 interviews, 10 observation, and 5 document review, and I'll talk about that in more details in the next following slides. So for the interviews, I conducted the interviews in semi-structured patterns. So 10 Saudi EFL instructors were recruited and asked 16 open-ended questions that aligned with the research questions. While they were interviewed, I also attempted to observe them at the same time, and that's something that I used, or let's say I just got the information from some of the references saying that one of the ways that you can do is to observe and also to do the interview at the same time, and that could be like a benefit way that you can use for your advantage. I use purposeful sampling to sample, or let's say to recruit the participants. I always selected Saudi participants for some reasons. We will talk about it. I conducted observation at the same time I was conducting the interviews. 10 participants, the same time of the interview, participants took part in the method in order to collect the non-spoken gestures. I wanted just to know how would they react to the emails, or let's say the text that they will read while they are also being observed. I did not tell them about the observation at that moment because I wanted just to get the genuine reflection, or let's say non-spoken gesture at the same time. So they were not aware that I was observing them. Participants were requested to read emails, and that's how I do it. So basically, if, for example, Naif received an email, I will take that email from Naif, give it to Anna, and then I ask Anna to read it. I just observe the reflection, or let's say the non-gestures or non-spoken words on Anna's face or body or those kind of things. Likewise, the email that Anna received, I take it and ask Naif to read it, and this is how I did the observation by myself. I only took the only observing mode, and that means that I did not take any part in the observation process. I only was observing. I did not give instruction or something. I was only observing. All right. I examined 5 emails that had been sent by EFL learners. The notion of doing so was to specify the directness level and appropriateness level as we have talked about it. All right. Procedure to select the participants to provide emails. So, for example, it was, or let's say, it was a random selection. So, the selected participants were requested to provide the last email they received from their EFL students. So, in this case, I will ask, for example, Naif, would you please give me the last email that you have received in English language from one of your students? If it's a short email, for example, thank you, or will do, or so, oh, okay, thank you for the information. If it's like very kind of that switchable email or something, I ask Naif to provide the last email that he received before this one. So that's how I just collected the emails. So I did the document review. If the last email was not meeting the criteria, then the participant was requested to provide let's say the previous email before the last one. So for the data analysis, after conducting interviews, observation, and reviewing emails, of course, transcriptions come to a place. And believe me, this process was really a tiring process for me. It took a lot of effort, a lot of time, and a lot of things just to do it or to get it over with. I did the intelligent transcription, and that means I deleted the no pauses, no correction, and whenever there's some kind of mistakes or something, I try to avoid it. Because most of the participants, they were Saudi EFL, so basically, this is not their first language, or let's say second language in some cases. So mistakes are always there. What are the benefits of coding? Increasing validity, decreasing the bias, accurately represent participants, and enable transparency. Coding can be deductive and inductive. The one I followed is the inductive. In this case, starting from the data and then build up my theory. So the process I did for the first round pass at coding, and then I organized my codes into categories and subcodes. Number 3, I did further rounds of coding, and then I turned codes and categories into the final narratives, which is the themes. To be honest, this process was really kind of, tiring one, and I got stuck to some point. I was somehow going nowhere. I asked Dr. Fentman, and she advised me just to go and ask one of my peers, and that's what I did. So if you get to this point and you get stuck, you should expect that. Do not get worried. It's something that you do. And one more thing that I wanted to say, for example, if I have different categories, for example, this sentence will be going to category 1, then when you read it again, you think it should go to number 2. After a while, no, it doesn't fit there. It should be number 5. And then it goes number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until you are fed up with it and you stop criticizing, or let's say evaluating that one and put it to the place where it should be. And that's really what I have gone through, and it was really a tiring process. What was the type of coding I used? I used the in vivo coding, and that's a code and an excerpt based on participants' own words. It's not the only one. I also use the thematic coding in some areas because in vivo coding was not a choice in some of the cases. So I used both of them, in vivo and also thematic coding. All right. For the data collection, sequence, and analysis, first of all, I started with transcription, and then I have the electronic version of the transcription. I did the observation, reviewing the emails, and creating themes, coding the data in vivo technique and thematic to create themes, and lastly, I did the second, third, and fourth, and fifth cycle to come up or to get to the conclusion of the themes that I have found. I did this matrix in order to find if my questions align with the methods that I used for collecting the data. So for the first question, we can see that interview, observation, and document, somehow those three serve answering the first question. The second question, only observation and interview can work, or let's say can serve to answer the next question. But number 3 was not a choice because it's not possible. For the trustworthiness of the study, I did the member check-in. So when I finished my observation, and also when I finished my interview, I sent it over to the participants just to check with them if I get what, let's say, if I get what they meant, and they said, and they confirmed it. The member also checked for the observation, and they provided their feedback. The last one, it was peer review, committee members in this case, and in some cases, as I told you, I have spoken to some of my friends who are also working in my colleague that I'm working, and they provided their feedback. And the case, or let's say the purpose of this is just to provide the trustworthiness of the study as much as possible. Limitation of the study, it's a case study, and as usual, when you are doing a case study, it always focuses on the cases. Number of the participants might be limited, although in my case it was like a little bit higher, I would say 10 participants. But some people will say, no, you need to add more. Potential bias of the researcher, because I was doing that in my working place, so I know the participants, they know me very well, and I took advantage of that, to be honest. Doing more research in this area is always recommended, so you can beat with the limitation of the case study, and that is recommended by researcher in most of the cases. Gillespie and other like famous names in researchers' background, they say always like to do more than one case study just to confirm with your results. Okay. For the delimitation, as I told you, I only have Saudi participants. They were my colleagues, and also I know the gatekeepers, so it was a little bit easier for me to get to the place, to get the admission, also to get the IRB approved, those kind of things. It's always like granted easily, and that's one of the delimitation of the study. All right. Results, discussion, and implication. For the first one, themes, number 1, conventionally direct, and this is one of the ideas. Most of the emails that I have found, or let's say the perception of how AFO instructors see it, they all almost agree that most of the emails they received is always like conventionally direct. So give me this, give me that, do this, do that. What are the reasons for these types? Number 1, L1 influence. Some of the participants indicated that Arabic, in this case, which is their L1, have an influence or had an influence on how they put their L2 English outcome, or let's say output in this case. So they say this is like one of the influences. This result is consistent with Kim's 1995 and also Kazemia's 2006 for transfer, and also Sanya and another study for translation. The second reason is for language effect. As we know, Saudi Arabia do not use, or let's say, English is not considered to be a second language in Saudi Arabia. It's a foreign language. So that means people most of the time they do not have the time, or let's say the ability to practice it. outside of the like institutions, or let's say in education institutions. Number 3, cultural effect. If instructors argue that direct requests are preferred in Saudi culture, then EFL learners employ them. In some regard, it is correct, because in some speech acts, when we are talking about, for example, invitations, and I'm talking about my home country now, Saudi Arabia, we tend to ask you many times, and we tend to be very direct when we invite you. So if we say, okay, come along, it means it is an invitation. It's not like somehow like a courtesy or something. No, I'm trying to just to get you invited. So they say that cultural effect, because we have this directness level in other aspects of speech acts, it is also can be seen in request as a speech act. Number 4, pragmatic topics. They say that if our learners have not been introduced to speech acts topics before, which causes numerous problems. This aligned with the research and the literature that like Taguchi's, Numana, and also Baring, Haroni, and Bordana, and other kind of research. They say also pragmatic topics, if they are not introduced to AFL learners, it's always could be a problematic for them to understand those topics and also to use it in the lab. For theme number 2, we have the perception of the indirect request. We'll say indirect request. This type was rare, although some students were successful in utilizing them. So some students were successful in utilizing indirect requests, which perceived as being polite. So there are some reasons for it. One of them is EFL instructors discussed how emails should be composed. And number 2, they also discussed the existence of politeness markers. For example, sorry for bothering you, but I'm wondering if it's possible. I know it's not a suitable time, but if there's any possibility, and other kind of funny markers like please and other things. The reason for it, number 1, good education. So some of those students, they have been outside of the country. Maybe like their father's parents, one of their parents, they were like diplomats or something, and they were like there. Maybe their parents have been like outside on scholarships, other kind of reasons, but they were outside of the country, and that's why. Especially most of the cases in one of the English-speaking countries, so they get involved with the community and they knew how to use those words properly. Number 2, peers interaction, and seems to be very interesting one. So sometimes interacting with your peers somehow elevates your interaction skills. And also, one of the things that I found puzzling, or let's say found interesting, video games. So they were like playing video games online on PS5 or, for example, Xbox or something. They needed to communicate with other people all over the globe. And one of the ways, you cannot like talk to the people the way that you should, let's say, that you expect them to just know it. For example, to go with the direct one. So you need to employ or utilize other kind of styles or strategies so other people can grant you what you want. Number 3, learners' emotions, inner feeling, and this is like beyond the topic that I was thinking of. One or two of the participants, they say, okay, we don't see it from this perspective, but maybe students are trying to be like, how can I say it in a polite way? They wanted to make sure they are granted what they're asking for, so that they use the polite way. Does it make sense? So they are trying to deceive you in a way, okay? So that was like really beyond the topic, but I have to come up with it. Teachers' observation and suggestions, they suggested enhancing learners' abilities by making them do more kind of, digging, or let's say, research about these topics. Also, instructions learners about importance of pragmatics, introducing these topics to them. As for question number 2, the answer was not same. So some of them was not offended, the majority. Some of them were offended, and some of them was like neutral. The majority, they were offended. They say, okay, not offended. They say, we do not care about it. We see emails as a way to convey messages. We do not like come here to judge on people based on the emails. The way we see it is just, we have a message, convey the message, get it done, that's it, period. We do not need just to go in deep with it. Although the majority was not offended, some participants they were. And they were saying, okay, you are an English learners, so you are supposed to learn those styles, and also you are expected to use the language in a way that somehow shows the different social power, distance, and also positions between students and also instructors. Of using language, by doing this can somehow enhance their abilities. When it comes to learners' practice, first of all, learners themselves, they need to put more effort in educating themselves. Number two, they need to use various methods and styles of composing effective requests that can be attained through communicating with peers, instructors, and others. When it comes to institutional, number one, they need to raise the awareness of EFL learners. Departments are encouraged to tailor their curricula appropriately based on the needs of their EFL learners. Number two, they should promote seminars, workshops that talks about pragmatics and its aspects. Number three, they need to use the latest materials such as books, learning equipment, and other kind of facilities just to make the learning process more successful. Recommendation for future studies or future research. Number one, future research should include both ESL and EFL learners. In my case, I only recruited EFL instructors. Little research has been done within this topic, which is the perception of emails. Adding more is always appreciated. It is recommended that other theoretical frameworks can be used, and always using other theoretical framework can lead to other results. Number four, the study can be extended by including more participants, and that's one of the limitations that I have already discussed. Recruiting males and females is always encouraged. In my case, I only recruited males due to some restrictions. I'll talk about it in a bit. Applying other research approaches may lead to different results and better understanding of the topic, of course. So those are some of the references. Thank you very much. I wanted just to point out, in Saudi culture, due to some religious and cultural restrictions, because I was doing video recording, most of the time women are covering their faces, so I cannot get their response, unless if they are uncovered, which is somehow maybe seen as a conflict, and that's why I try to avoid this problem from the start, and only recruited the male. And thank you very much. That's what I wanted to discuss. Thank you guys. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
We'll hold the questions to the end, just
Okay,
to make sure we have enough time.
All right, thank you so much to give me the chance to be part of the LLC series sessions. So it's my pleasure to talk about my study that is basically focusing on the gaining or understanding the faculty or the teacher perspectives towards translanguaging as a multilingual teaching approach, representing actually the multilingual term in the language teaching all over the world. My name is Naif Masrahi. I am a PhD candidate of the Education Linguistics at the UNM, and this is my 4th year here, and hopefully I can complete my study and finish my degree by the end of this year. To give you background about my study, first of all, as you can see, translanguage representing, unifying linguistic repertoire of the learners. We don't have any separation between actually the language, so we consider all of them as a tool or as a resources to help in learning languages. First of all, unfortunately, there are many education systems around the globe, are adapting the English only policy without understanding the actual needs and the contextual needs of the learners and even the faculties. So that's why I actually created more a kind of difficulty among the faculties, especially in the Saudi context regarding to the students' level of English. Unfortunately, Saudi students, they spend 9 years to 10 years learning English, and once they reach the university level, their English level is categorized under the poor level or as a beginners. So this is actually a huge problem in our context. Many actually conferences discussing this point currently and also in the past days. many theories and language approaches teaching applied, but the result what? The result is nothing, and still the students need to spend 2 years or 1.5 years in their university level just to continue, learning English before they go to their majors. In addition, the Saudi students who wants to participate or to go overseas scholarship, they have the same problem, that they should actually take English courses, although they did the same. They spent 10 years in learning language, but they have the problem of low level of English. So again, they have to go back to learn more, English courses and practice English. One of the main reasons actually is the adapting only English policy. So because of this reason, now there is a multilingual trend all over the world saying that why don't we try, for example, the multilingual teaching approaches, especially translanguaging, that because it helps actually to access the areas linguistically, but what to understand, to learn, and then actually to communicate using the English language. One point that supports this point is the Saudi Vision 23, especially the transformational points in education that supports, to include or to have tolerance with other languages such as English, French, and other languages, actually to help in supporting, the economy, as well as focusing on the Saudi learners to educate them with different languages and different, different subjects that help them actually to support the economy. So this means that the translanguages goes in line with the Saudi Vision 23 in terms of accepting the other languages. As we said, it creates spaces to help the learners to access their linguistic repertoire, to understand and learn the English language. So my purpose in doing this study is just I want to focus on basically finding the perspectives of the EFL learners, because it will help actually to increase the understanding and the awareness about the pedagogies and the application of the translanguaging inside the classroom, and hopefully it can develop the English level of the students, of the Saudi students particularly. And also it could work as a good sign or as a good result to support the implications through giving the decision makers the chance to think about allowing the multilingual teaching approach, and instead of focusing only on English language policy inside the classroom. The sociolinguistic of Saudi Arabia, as you know, Arabic is the official language of communications, and even in the official sectors. And also dialects are used. We have many dialects in Saudi Arabia. We have the Hijazi, the Naif, for example, the southern and the eastern one. So we have many dialects, but these dialects are not used in the official context, especially the written communications. Mostly is the verbal one. English in Saudi Arabia is a foreign language, but here is the contradictions with the policy is that we consider English as a foreign language, but we teach it intensively in the schools and in the university, which question actually creates a big question mark whether we consider it as a foreign language or in the practice as actually second language. So again, there is actually a huge gap in terms of theory and practice, and in terms of the policy of English language in the Saudi context. In the English classroom, the English only policy is being used as the only actually way to learn or to teach the English. The Saudi Vision, the new Saudi Vision, support both Arabic as a mother tongue of the Saudis and English as a language for communication with the whole world to support the economy and diversify the source of incomes for the economy. And instead of depending on oil prices only, because as you know the oil prices now is dropping all over the world, but now we are creating other sources such as tourism, trade, and international communications, and promoting the Arabic cultures and allowing many international tourists to visit the historical and the cultural sites in Saudi Arabia as a way to support the Saudi income. That's why actually it creates possibility for adapting translanguage, because we have this new vision that gives tolerance to the other language and include them in the community itself. The problem, as we said, is actually the low level of the students is the huge problem that we are targeting here. Why? Because, as we said, the policy, the attitude of English in the beginning of teaching it as a foreign language Unfortunately, English was seen as a source of the colonization, or as a source actually of impacting negatively or the Arabic culture. So that's why in the beginning there was some kind of resistance for accepting the English language. But through the days, the generations are different, the perspectives change, and consider it because English has become an important language now all over the world. That's why actually the new Fijian is considering as a more opening for it. So hopefully trans language could be one of these possibilities to improve the English language levels, because it allows students to learn and communicate through accessing the linguistic repertoire to think and to understand and learn. Why my research is important? Because the teacher perspective is very important to have this complete understanding about the translanguage and technical framework. Also, I want to fill the research gap in the literature, and also because of the implications that were published in the recent research of translanguaging. Hopefully, this implication could actually to allow to permit the using the multilingual teaching approaches inside the classroom to help the students to learn English. Here is my research questions. There are 4, and I'm basically focusing on the perspectives. What are the perspectives of the AFL faculty at the Saudi University toward the multilingual teaching approaches, translanguaging, and why? What are the common obstacles they are facing when adapting translanguaging, and what is their opinion of the AFL faculty about the English-only policy inside the English classes, and why? And how do they actually create a balance between their academic personal values or beliefs of multilingual teaching approach and the current English teaching policy inside the Saudi University. In my framework, actually, I focused on translanguage as a theory and approach, in addition to the sociocultural theory. So the translanguaging as an approach or multilingual approach, as we said, actually acknowledge the linguistic repertoire of the learners because it's considered them as an important source to learn the language. And instead of neglecting the previous experience of language teaching and learning, no, we are considering that as an important resource to help them actually learn the language. And also, there is no boundaries among languages. For example, this is English, this is Arabic, this is Spanish. No, we consider them as all unified linguistic repertoire to help learning the language. We are focusing on translanguage more in the practice, more than on following the specific specific standards that actually do not fit with the, for example, the Saudi context or Arabic context in general. This is actually one of the most important framework or models that explain the difference between the translanguaging and other approaches that represent the separation between the L1 and L2, as we see actually the traditional model of the bilingualism that separate between the L1 and L2, while the linguistic interdependence of the comments, although actually support both the L1 and L2, but we can see actually that L1 depends on L2 learning and vice versa. Again, it believes in the separation. And here comes the value of the translanguaging that believes actually in the dynamic interaction between the different linguistic experiences and background to help in learning the language. So there is no boundaries among different languages of the learners. In addition to the dialects, not only languages. One of the most important definitions that actually explain the translanguage is the definition of Othik and Reid and Garcia. They talked about translanguage as the deployment of the speaker's full linguistic repertoire, as we say, without regard for watchful adherence to the social and politically defined boundaries of the named languages. And usually these actually are created according to the national state, for example, languages. Like, for example, in this context, we should only use this language. This is actually different from translanguage. We value different dialects and we value different languages of the learners. To make a difference between translanguage and code switching, there is a huge difference in terms of perspectives. The perspectives, for example, the code switching perspective is coming from the monolingual teaching approaches that separate the languages. For example, this is Arabic, this is English, this is Spanish. While the translanguage, we focus more on the speaker's perspectives and linguistic repertoire. So as a unified one, not separated, there is no separation among different languages. And instead of focusing, for example, which language to use, we focus more here in the practice and the perspectives of the speaker himself or herself. Sociocultural theory value actually the learning of the language through the social communication interactions, in which actually agrees with that translanguaging in terms of theory and practice, because Vygotsky believes in unitary of the internal and the external sources for language learning. And here also comes the agreement with the translanguage in terms of valuing both the practices and the linguistic repertoire of the learners. Again, both of them agree that implying the English only or only one language inside the classroom help to disturb, the language learning process, because there is no connection between the social community of the learners and the internal or the individual thinking or the language that they have. So the students may feel actually it's kind of separation, that I am not learning the language for meaning, because this language, for example, has no meaning in my life. I cannot practice in my life. But if you believe there is a connection between the social community and the language approach itself, then this means there is a connection, and then the learners can have the meaning for their language learning. Recent research showed debate about using the L1 and L2. Some of them they agree, some of them do not agree. For example, the students, for example, some researchers think that the students need to think in English. Why? Because the language must be labeled differently in the brain. While the recent research from the psycholinguistics and neurolinguistics shows that there is no separation inside the brain saying this is controlled the mother tongue and this is controlled the second language. So why? Because the brain actually deals with both of them or many languages in a parallel way. Also, some of them they think that using the L1 will increase the problem of the language interference. Well, language interference is not only negative, because there is a positive side, which is, for example, some languages they share some sounds. For example, in Arabic we have the sound B as a book, and also English they have the same thing. So the Saudi or the Arabic language could actually learn easily the sound, because there is some kind of overlapping and sharing. And also some of them they think that if they use the L1 it will reduce the practice inside the classroom. This is actually invalid, because the low level students actually they need to practice, for example, using their L1 to help in understanding the L2, because they want to access their linguistic repertoire to learn the second language, to understand the meaning of the words before they practice it. Recent research also, they are limited in terms of context, participant methodology, on translanguaging, and also it confirmed actually the practice of teaching. The Saudi teachers and faculty, they are using the Arabic while they are teaching the English, and also they confirm the low level of the learners. So basically the disagreement is basically because of the ideological reasons, that there is each context of English teaching, they are supporting a specific way of teaching or learning language, and it is different all over the world. So that's why actually this is a source of disagreement about the multilingual teaching approaches. In my methodology, I applied or I used actually the qualitative case study approach, and I used the semi-structured interviews, focused group discussion, and field notes to collect the data. Why? Because I want to have actually more description about the perspectives or the faculty perspectives regarding to the translanguaging. These details transcriptions or this detailed data will help me actually to identify the meanings, because that's why I applied the case study approaches. And also in my analysis, I used the thematic analysis that from stake to help me creating the codes and also the themes of the study. The context is English Language Institute at Saudi University. It was founded in 2006. And it has many international faculty from all over the world, from Saudi Arabia, from USA, from Egypt, from Jordan, from Senegal, from India. So they are diverse in terms of different countries. And also all of them actually they teach these courses at the university currently. The participants were 6 faculty, 3 of them were male and 3 of them were female. So, and I had specific criteria to include them in my research, such as they should have at least 5 years of experience teaching English, and also multilinguals. They have to know many languages, and also they have higher academic qualifications because of their, to help, having an academic discussion with them. In the I applied different techniques to increase the validity and trustworthiness of my research, such as the checklist, which help actually to increase the validity. And also I use the triangulation, 3 different methods. And also I use member checking and peer review. And I was actually included the follow-up interview just to have more details if I was needed to have more details about the topic. In my finding, majority of the faculty actually they supported the translanguaging, and they have this positive way looking to the translanguaging, and also although they're positive way, they have low awareness about translanguaging. But this means that they need actually more courses and more workshops to include them in learning language, or to know more about actually the translanguaging theoretical framework itself. Because they came with different definitions of translanguage. Some of them say it's a bilingualism, or it is, for example, they're using L1 inside the classroom, which shows they are actually not familiar about the topic itself. This is some examples from their point of view. Some of them they say it's equal competence of L2 and L1. Some of them say it's translation method. Some of them say maybe it's like language transfer, which support actually their low understanding about theoretical framework. They call to empower them to participate in the teaching methodology inside the classroom instead of relying on English-only policy. And also, importantly, there is an agreement between the transformation ideology of Saudi Fiji 23 and also the translanguage in terms of critical thinking. They report some obstacles such as the English-only policy, low understanding of the multilingual teaching approaches, and the level of the students. So some of them, for example, say it's a real problem that students get a little bit at the right levels, and this is known to everyone. It's a common knowledge to everyone that the Saudi students have this problem of low English level. So they reported some functions inside the classroom, such as translanguage could help to increase the understanding of the students, to simplify the lessons and the activities, and also to support the sense of belonging to the Arabic language. Teachers can strike balance through adapting or having understanding for how to adapt that to empower, for example, the students inside the classroom to use the teaching methodologies, particularly translanguaging, and also to adapt by using the systematic adaptation, and also which means they should know when and how to adapt it. Recommendations, they recommended to increase the awareness about the systematic adaptation and to have more workshop about Arabic teaching for the international faculty, because they want them actually to use that, and also to frame the practices instead of excluding the L1 of the learners. We need to include them and to focus, for example, in the overlapping. As we see in the example, I would like to have a cup of coffee. Coffee is overlapping term between Arabic and English, so they can understand more the language. And to create spaces for teaching Englishes. And here is some of the strategies that are recommended, such as sandwiching, body language, and brainstorming using the L1, and also to use the reflective journals to help supporting their English level. The most important thing that the adaptation should be systematic and strategic, which means it should be valid for the reasons. Limitation of my study, although the case study is question regarding to the generalizability, but it's still valuable for the context of the study, and also time consuming, the qualitative research time consumed, and I use Zoom for the interview, which I could miss some details, and also my research have some high level of the bias because I was involved in doing all of these procedures, and I have limited the number of the participants. Limitation or delimitation is considered, for example, a specific Saudi university criteria, participant, theoretical framework, and methodology. And that's it. Thank you so much.
With translanguaging, this is, I think, is an issue, especially post-COVID. The motivation for anything. So how do you think motivation, like translanguaging, might affect motivation for learners in learning English?
I will give actually an example from my context that my students, for example, they used to have these low motivations. One of the main reasons behind that is that we are using English most of the time. And they come up with this, idea that sometimes they're asking themselves, why I am learning English? They have no meaning. The English has no connection with their society. So I guess if we link the communications of inside the classes with our community, for example, we could ask them to use that the Arabic culture value with the family trees, for example. We can give them actually a chance to talk about their family backgrounds or their cultural backgrounds, to brainstorm in Arabic and then to write in English.
Mm-hmm.
This may actually reduce their awareness of language learning and motivate them more to learn the language. Unfortunately, my experience is mostly with the low-level students, and I have seen many actually negative examples. But when I speak with them in Arabic and try to understand what is their problem and what are actually their obstacles. So trying to solve them step by step using the Arabic language, and then we go to the English language in terms of practice, that actually supported them a lot.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned too, like, sense of belonging very briefly.
Yes.
I mean, it seems like it all kind of ties together. Do you think that translanguaging can then help increase sense of belonging, which then helps increase, and this is a leading question, obviously, but I mean, do you think it'll, I guess I'd like you to talk more about having that sense of belonging through translanguaging.
Yes, translanguaging, when the students use both translanguaging, they are not using only English. They're using both Arabic, English, and also their dialects.
Mm-hmm.
So translanguaging does not help to improve their English only. It also supports to improve their L1, which is the Arabic in this case. That's why actually when they use more the Arabic, in addition to the English, they increase their chances of including their culture and mother tongue could increase their sense of belonging. That's actually reported in many recent research, especially in the Arabian countries. Luckily, the Saudi Vision 23 is supporting that. Although in the beginning of the teaching of English language, they banned the using of the L1, but now they are having this value, protecting Arabic language through the practice.
Mm-hmm.
Not only writing that in the policy and documents. We can practice our language. In addition, we can include the others in a tolerance more point of view.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And a question?
Yeah, please, hit me.
So it sounded from your research that there could be some implications for neurodivergent learners and instructors as well when it comes to what you were researching. Was there anything that you were doing in your research? I know you can't ask if students are autistic or like that, so we can't do this. But is there anything that you think that there could be a future direction in assisting maybe neurodivergent learners with learning another language or just in general communication?
Yeah, in my case, I think always like promoting pragmatic subjects a little bit earlier for students, always like open horizons for them.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, they can get them more aware of their languages and how they use it in different applications. In some extent, as you know now, English has been a universal language. So when you learn that language, you should know also all the aspects that relate to it. One of them is the pragmatic aspects. I think by practicing, or let's say introducing topics of pragmatics a little bit earlier, would also make them more successful in their lives. Not only their academic life, but also in their work life, or maybe after academic life. So that's one way that I see it. Basically, it should be open horizon for them if they are working with us, especially in some circumstances working with tourists. They need to be polite and they want to sound like they are welcoming to other people. Otherwise, they will not get the chance to just to work with them. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.
So I have a question, and this is sort of a for both of you. So in both of your presentations, whether we're looking at pragmatics or translanguaging, it seems that in your findings and in your discussions with the teachers, there's different perspectives on these topics, but there's sort of a need for increased awareness of, what pragmatics are or what translanguaging is among both teachers and students. And so, how do you see this
the results of your studies informing teacher education or teacher training in your context? So that's a question for both of you that you can answer.
So in my case, we have a mutual kind of agreement. To be honest, when I started my interview with my, like let's say, colleagues, they have this kind of agreement that pragmatics should be introduced. Although we do not have like a specific course that is named pragmatics, but they say, okay, this should be like within the curriculum of the students. We cannot ignore it anymore. It cannot be neglected anymore. We should introduce it. So we have like a kind of mutual understanding. Let's say mutual agreement, but almost all participants, not only that the one that I have interviewed, but other kind of colleagues, they say yes. So there have been some kind of workshops, presentations back in my home country, and they were doing some let's say, workshops about pragmatics in general, and they say, yes, we saw that after those workshops, after those presentations, students' levels were enhancing, and that was like a good point. And they wanted just to continue with it. One of the ways they were like somehow suggesting introducing pragmatics topics to the institution. And I think, in a way or another, hopefully, they will get convinced and then we can somehow like generalize it to the whole country.
In my case, in terms of informing the teaching practices inside the classroom, actually I was surprised at the beginning that most of them, they agreed it's positive. But two or one of them, actually, they were hesitant about that because they haven't seen that in the practices. I mean, when I said practices, I mean their language teaching and their language learning back home. Most or two of them were actually from European countries, so most of them, these countries, they or adapt the English only policy. When during the focus discussion group, when they noticed that majority of the faculty are supporting translanguaging because it had a relation with the context, then they asked these questions. If this is the case, why the university did not actually prepare a workshop about Arabic language teaching? We don't know Arabic, and the students, their English level is poor. So we should know Arabic at least to help them to understand what we are saying or to have a meaning for their educations. So number one, to have this workshop about Arabic language. Number two, to increase the awareness of faculty about the translanguaging and also the multilingual teaching approaches. They did that in the practice. They are adapting that. But their understanding on how to adapt that and the theoretical framework itself, unfortunately, was very low. That's why actually they recommended more training workshop. Hopefully I can do that when I come back actually for them to improve actually the meaning of adapting the multilingual teaching approach, in addition to correct the negative attitude, as you know, Dr. Ima, about the multilingual teaching approaches. Hamzah knows very well that some of the people in our university, they are against this policy, and I have engaged in many debates during the councils with them, and most of the time I win, most of the time sometimes I lose, but at least I am fighting for the sake of the students.
I was one of them, but I've changed my mind later.
You two can get together.
Yes.
All right. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you so much. These are wonderful presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.